Okay, so at this point we're going to create a UI for our character. So when the game begins, you've got your oxygen displayed and the number of treasures you've collected. I've got an example I've already put together. We'll be rebuilding one ourselves. But yeah, so I've got a progress bar that as your oxygen increases and decreases, that'll alter. And then I've got the number of treasures kept track of by a number over here. And yeah, we're going to mock up our own equivalent of this. So the first thing you're going to want to do is create what's known as a widget blueprint. So we're just going to call this, we've already got one called Oxygen HUD. We're going to call this Oxygen UI. I'm going to pop that open. And just to get started with, I'm just going to chuck in a block of text. And I'm just going to call it test. Press enter and then just knock up the size. Just so I've got something that I can display to the screen for us to start working with, and then I can start adding the actual elements from there. So before we do anything else, I'm going to nip into my first person character, and we're going to create a chunk of code that's going to display our interface to the viewport. So I'm going to call this I need to get the begin, so we need to get the event that checks if the game's begun or whether the object's been created in the level. So this is still available, and I'm going to drag a line off from this. I'm going to search for widget, and there's a category called create widget, and this is going to be, if we click on the drop down here, you can see that we've got Oxygen UI listed. And yeah, the only other thing we need to do is tell it to actually display it to the screen. Add to viewport, there we go. Let's check see if that runs. We need to make sure that's connected across, and that should run. So let's quickly check to see if that's working. There we go. So we've got a nice, we've got the word test being displayed on our screen now, which we can work with. So from here, we're going to need to kind of delve into the nitty-gritty side of getting this set up. So let's go back into our UI. We can get rid of this now, and we're going to replace that with a progress bar. Now we're going to be using this, rather than to measure progress, we're going to use it to see how much oxygen the player has left. If I scale the percentage bar, that's going to give you an indicator of what we're working with. And currently that's not very useful because it's, we've stretched it vertically and it's scaling, it's the bar, the progress bar is scaling horizontally. So we need to switch that from bottom to top. And there you go. So we've got an oxygen meter now that we can alter. And then we're also just going to drag in some text and another section of text for our score. So I'm just going to set that to the value of 0. Crank up that size. And there we go. That's the value there. Just need to add the word treasure. With a little semicolon at the end. Scale that up too. And there we go. So we've got those two things being displayed on screen now. And if I just give this a quick test as well, we're not going to do anything yet, but we have got them being displayed, which is great. So the thing that we need to do next is we need to actually figure out how to link this and this to our game. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to create what's known as a bind. And that's going to be essentially to our player, the information that the player has within it. So if you click on the drop down, not for the color and opacity, apologies, for the text, we're going to create a binding there, and that will bring up the graph and it'll give us this little sequence we've got here. And this is going to, whatever we put in between these two nodes is going to be essentially like retrieving something for us. So I'm just going to rename this, and I'm going to call it number of treasures. Okay. And what we want to do, as we've done previously, we've covered this a couple of times already, we're going to want to cast to our first person player. Remember that we need to link these does it need to return node? Okay, so that actually interesting. So before this point, I've been using get player controller to be able to access. So I usually get player controller, and then from that I get the player pawn, and then from that I then connect that up. But actually, you can just access the player pawn as the as the access point, and that seems to be happy with that. So we'll see if that causes any issues down the line, but I'm reasonably confident in saying that seems to have worked. So that's great. So yeah, link that up to there. And then as our first person character, obviously what we need to do is retrieve that treasure node. So let's search for that. Get treasures gathered. And then let's link that to there. And I know they're different colors, but certain nodes are able to connect and be essentially bridged by, in this case, a to text node, which is converting our float to a chunk of text that we can then display to the screen. So if I check this again now, and then just dive down and grab a treasure, there you go. We've got our number scaling there. So let's just test this one more time just to make sure it's definitely right. Yep. Good stuff. So the last bit that we're obviously going to need to, the last bit that we're going to need to sort out is sorting out a bind for the progress bar. So same process again. Now, there is actually an interesting shortcut that I've discovered, that if you create a reference to your first person character, you can sidestep having to, just bear with me a sec, remove binding. Okay. If I create a reference to my first person character, so promote to a local variable, promote to a variable, I don't need to keep this attached. As long as the variable exists of the player or the character, I can now access the functions of the player. So if I go back out and try to create a bind again now, you can see now that all of these features of my player are now accessible. So drop down on the player, I can grab oxygen, and now that is essentially, let me go back up to the top. Okay, you know what, we've got the same predicament as before, that our percentage is 1 or 0, and player oxygen is, it's 1,000. So we need to we aren't going to be able to use this option for our player. Sorry, for the oxygen. So we're going to have to do this manually. You could probably do it for the treasure. In fact, let's set that up for the treasure. We might as well set it up for 1, just to be able to kind of get the experience of no, it'll be fine. If you want to look into it in your own time, there's plenty of tutorials that kind of go through it. I'm just going to set this up now and just kind of do it this method, just because it's going to cause complications otherwise, and I can't be bothered like trying to get my head around them. So let's go inside this function that we've created. Let's give it a decent name, oxygen level, and let's do the same process again. We actually might be able to grab the reference here. Yeah. Okay, so what we've done is the reference that we created in here, we can access also under oxygen, and yeah, under our oxygen level. We've created a reference for the player, and we've used that to be able to get the variable oxygen that we created in the first person character. If we drag another line off of this, we're going to do what we did when we made the post-processing effect. If you remember, we did the post-processing effect where we divided the value of oxygen by 1,000, and that was to get it down to a small enough number to be able to use. Yeah, we're going to do the same here again, and then we're just going to connect that into the return value. And you'll notice in this case it's a number rather than text, because the other one, our number of treasures is a word that we're displaying on the screen. In this case we're recording a number. So if we go back to our UI and just test our game now, that should be working. Let's give that a quick check. Oh, we need to just save. Let's just make sure that's saved and compiled. Huh. Let's just check that one more time. Oxygen level. Oxygen. Something I'm missing here. I'm not 100% sure. Let's just accelerate the speed at which the oxygen runs down, because I just want to check to see what happens when we get real close to running out. Apologies for this. This is new. Oh yeah, we need to get into water. Okay. That's unusual. Oxygen divided by 1,000. I'm just going to disconnect these here, and just to play it safe, I'm going to use the traditional method of getting this set up. Let's just make sure that doesn't make a difference. There we go. I'm not 100% sure what the reason for that working was. I don't know whether it needed to be connected to an executable, thus being, if this just being on its own, wherever it was, if this just being on its own wasn't activating because it wasn't connected to anything, that might well be the case. But it's working now, so what I'll do is I'll just kind of run through what we've got here just one more time, just to make sure we've got it. Apologies just for the hiccup there. I thought that we'd be able to link this in a nicer way, but unfortunately it's not playing ball. So yeah, just to summarize on what we've got. So we created this binding known as oxygen level, and you've got your two components. You've got your your input and then your output. So this is what we're going to be changing it to, and this is where we're kind of setting it and triggering this event. And then what we're using this for is to access the value of oxygen. So we're casting to the first person character, retrieving the value of oxygen, and then dividing by 1,000 to get that value down from 1,000 to 1. And then all of the little digits in between, which we can use to work on a scale of, if you look at the designer, of between, where's the percentage? Between 0 and 1, all of the decimal places in between. And yeah, that looks like we've got it set up. I'm just going to change this back to what it was before, and then we'll give it one final test, and yeah, I think that should pretty much wrap up everything that I've at least wanted to have us talk about in this tutorial. Let me just make sure we've 100% got everything. Oh yeah, and also if you're wanting to set your camera back to its original position, just set it back to the default player start. And there we go. So I'm swimming around, the oxygen level's going down. You might also want to take, if you want, you could also take the string. If you don't want to display the string anymore, you can disable that and delete it. That way it's just the bar that you're seeing on the screen. So I'm just going to dive down, grab a couple of the treasures, check that it doesn't, that if I run out of oxygen I die, and then other than that, we're good. So cheers for sticking with this, and yeah, very best of luck with whatever you're trying to achieve with your projects. So yeah.